Silent transformation, Carl Jung's guide to self-discovery. When I say that true change is born in silence, I am not speaking of a mystical trick, I am describing a tangible practice that transforms motivation, habits, and identity. I have seen, time and again, that when I announce a plan to everyone, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to start a course, I'm going to change careers, something strange happens, a rush of social approval replaces genuine effort. It was as if someone were giving me a trophy before the race had even begun. This sensation of premature victory steals the energy needed for the daily work. I described this in the very transcript of this material. By telling our plans, we already receive a dose of social approval that tricks the brain into thinking the goal has been achieved. Science confirms this feeling. Researchers have shown that intentions that become public, what they call social reality, tend to be translated into action with less intensity than intentions kept silent. In other words, when others have already noted your intention, you often act less on it. This happens because the act of communicating the goal reduces the psychological gap between where we are and where we want to be, the gap that normally propels us to act. The MIT Sloan Review summarized it well, talking about plans can kill part of the motivation and productivity by creating a premature sense of completion. So, what I propose, and have practiced, is simple but requires courage. Make a silent pact with yourself. It's not a secret, it's a personal contract. I also describe this in the text. If you want to get your life on track, make a silent commitment to yourself, don't tell anyone, just start. The difference between a public promise and this intimate pact is that the second one preserves the necessary tension, and that tension is fuel. Without it, we are seduced by one last sip of approval that lulls us before the real work begins. If you are already saying, "But I need accountability, I won't get lost," I understand you. It's a common objection, how to maintain discipline without external feedback. The practical answer I used was twofold. First, create micro-routines so small that no one needs to know about them, 5 minutes of writing, 10 minutes of study, a 15-minute walk. These actions are easy to repeat, easy to measure internally, and, because they are small, they don't trigger the impulse to tell everyone, as if they had already been worth the effort. Second, if you need to share with someone, choose wisely who will listen. Research shows that the person with perceived status can increase commitment. Telling someone who respects you and expects consistency can be helpful, but only after you have already started the process. In practice, my method was as follows, and you can adapt it to your context. I decided I was going to change, chose a simple goal, and after 3 small daily steps, I would allow myself only a private note. Step 1, define a minimum action per day, e.g., 10 minutes of writing. Step 2, open a notebook just for myself and, at the end of the day, write a single line, "I did X today." Step 3, keep track without publishing anything. On the 7th day, I would reread the notes. On the 30th, I would evaluate the changes in my internal feeling, not in external validation. This routine preserves what science calls process praise, valuing the process instead of the person, which proves to be more robust for maintaining real motivation than compliments that say, "You are amazing," and close the action cycle. I want to be honest about fear and resistance. At first, the silence feels heavy. You feel the urge to tell, to gain support, to share the expectation, to ease the nerves. I felt that too. The first few weeks were full of temptation. Opening my feed and writing, "Started today," seemed like a quick way to receive applause that I believed I deserved. Resisting this is part of the exercise. In my case, the more the urge to tell was pressed, the more I remembered that external approval could be a trap, and so I would breathe, close my phone, and fulfill my small commitment. This simple gesture, not showing, was liberating. Gradually, the impulse to prove something to others was replaced by a more silent desire, to be aligned with myself. Let me tell you something very specific that happened to me, because I know that real stories connect more than theories. There was a period when I would announce improvements that never stuck. One day I decided, that's enough. Instead of proclaiming, "I'm going to stop procrastinating," I made a clear rule for myself. Every day, at that time, I would work for 25 minutes without interruption. I didn't tell anyone. On the first day, I felt proud and had the temptation to announce it, but I resisted. On the fifth day, an old urge to justify myself appeared so strong that it gave me physical anxiety, a tightness in my chest. I thought about giving up everything. I was sad. I thought maybe I wasn't capable. But I continued. On the 10th day, when I opened my notebook, I saw 10 small entries, 10 silent proofs that I was changing. It was there that I felt something new. The pain gave way to a kind of quiet pride, an energy that did not depend on likes. This feeling transformed my way of working and my self-esteem in a discreet but profound way, and, over time, resulted in real changes in my routine and my relationships. There were no fireworks, but there was a consistency that spoke louder than any post could have. This experience taught me that the conquest of oneself is, in fact, the most difficult, and the most liberating. And for those who think this is just introspective talk, think about concrete situations. If you are a parent trying to get back in shape, instead of creating a post announcing your new routine, try doing 3 short walks a week and logging them in your notebook. If you want to change jobs, set aside 1 hour a day to study and don't turn every progress into content for social media, turn it into real competence. If you are struggling to improve a relationship, try practicing 1 authentic gesture a day without telling anyone, true listening, a sincere apology, a boundary set with calm. Small actions, kept and repeated, have cumulative power. Finally, I propose a practical challenge that I myself used. For 30 days, choose a goal and keep it silent. Do 3 things. A. Define the smallest possible action you will do daily. B. Log just 1 line per day in your private notebook. C. At the end of the 30 days, evaluate what changed in your internal feeling, energy, clarity, anxiety, and compare it to the impulse you would have had if you had announced everything on day 1. I guarantee the difference will be clear. And if, along the way, you need support, choose carefully who to tell. Prefer people who value the process and not the personification of success. Being silent is not hiding. It is giving your transformation the time and matter to germinate. It is creating conditions so that when you finally share the story, it is legitimate, a story of true change, not a draft that went viral before it was even written. The shadow. This is one of the most uncomfortable and, at the same time, most liberating concepts I have ever shared. When I talk about the shadow, I'm not referring to something external, but to the parts of ourselves that we choose to bury, hide, and deny. They are traits, impulses, desires, talents, and even virtues that were condemned at some point in life and ended up relegated to the basement of the psyche. Jung said, "That which is not made conscious manifests as destiny." And that's exactly what I see repeatedly. What we deny in ourselves comes back in a distorted way, appearing in crises, sabotages, and reactions that seem inexplicable. Perhaps you have been deeply bothered by someone without even being able to explain why. That arrogant colleague, the lazy neighbor, the exaggerated friend. The curious thing is that, according to Jung, what irritates us most in others often reflects precisely what we do not accept in ourselves. If I despise someone I consider arrogant, perhaps it is because I have never allowed myself to recognize my own greatness. If I feel angry at someone else's laziness, perhaps it is because I forbid myself to rest. It is not easy to admit this, but when we do, something changes, the irritation loses strength and gives way to unexpected compassion. I myself lived this painfully. There was a time when I was bothered by extremely assertive people. I found them aggressive, inconvenient, even rude. What I did not realize is that, deep down, I was dying to be firmer, to set boundaries, to say no when necessary. But since I learned early on that being good meant being understanding and submissive, I hid my natural firmness in the shadow. The result, every time someone was direct, it hurt me like a knife. It was only when I recognized that this assertiveness also existed in me, and that I needed to bring it to light in a healthy way, that I began to feel free. I remember the first time I said a calm and clear no. It seemed simple, but it was revolutionary. I felt a mix of fear and relief. The fear of not being accepted, but the relief of finally being honest with myself. And, to my surprise, instead of rejection, the other person respected me even more. This experience showed me that the shadow is not an enemy, it is a reservoir of unused forces. To you listening to me now, I ask, how many times have you defined yourself with phrases like, "I'm not that kind of person"? Is that really true? Or have you just locked that part in the shadow? Someone who has always seen themselves as straightforward may have a liberating spontaneity inside. Someone who has always assumed they are a rebel may carry a dormant discipline that they have never dared to explore. And someone who lives only by reason may be ignoring a precious intuition. What do you think you are hiding from yourself? When we do not look at these parts, we create internal tensions that lead us to act in ways we do not understand. This is where repeated patterns of failure arise, relationships that always end the same way, broken promises, sabotaged goals. It is as if the unconscious, ignored, decides to knock on the door with increasing force until it is recognized. A famous and painful example is that of Robin Williams. A genius of comedy, admired by millions, but who lived suffocated by internal pains that did not reconcile with the public image he maintained. His trajectory shows us that when the shadow is not integrated, it can swallow even the most luminous talents. It's not that he didn't have light, he had too much. But without embracing his own darkness, the light becomes too heavy to carry alone. Now think of the opposite. How many people transform their aggression into courage to defend ideas, their vanity into a healthy self-care, their sadness into artistic sensitivity? The shadow contains gold, as Jung said. When we integrate these parts, we stop wasting energy fighting against ourselves and begin to channel it into creation, presence, and authenticity. Science reinforces this point. Studies in psychology show that emotional repression consumes psychic and physical energy, increasing the risk of depression, anxiety, and even cardiovascular diseases. In contrast, integration practices, such as therapeutic writing, internal dialogue, and dream analysis, help release this energy, increasing well-being and a sense of purpose. It's not distant philosophy, it's applied neuroscience. When the unconscious stops sabotaging, the whole body works better. I want to propose something practical to you. Today, instead of just judging who bothers you, pause and ask yourself, what exactly about this person irritates me so much? Where does a similar trait exist in me, even if hidden? Write this down in a notebook. Not to punish yourself, but to investigate. Treat this discovery like a curious scientist analyzing a rare phenomenon. Over time, you will notice patterns. And perhaps you will discover that the person who bothers you most out there is just a mirror of what you need to rescue inside. It's not a comfortable path. Admitting that we are also what we reject requires courage. But the reward is immense, more energy, more authenticity, more freedom. Because, deep down, we don't become whole just by integrating the beautiful part of ourselves, it's also by embracing what we hide. And only when we stop fighting against our own shadow can we, at last, walk in peace with who we are. How many times have you come close to something great and, all of a sudden, it seemed like the ground opened up? You had everything going for you, but an inner voice made you stop, procrastinate, or even destroy what you had built. This is self-sabotage. And the most disturbing thing is to realize that, many times, it doesn't happen due to bad luck or lack of ability, but because there is something inside of us that, silently, prefers that we stay in the same place. Jung saw this clearly: when we repress parts of who we are, when we pretend that certain feelings don't exist, the unconscious finds creative ways to manifest itself. It doesn't disappear. It disguises itself as procrastination, anxiety attacks, or silly mistakes that cost dearly. Has it ever happened to you that you prepare for months for something important and, on the crucial day, you make a mistake that seemed impossible? Well, that's it. It wasn't an accident. It was the unconscious knocking on the door. I remember an episode that deeply marked me. I was facing an opportunity that could change my professional life. Everything was aligned, and I just needed to take the next step. But, days before, my body simply gave in. A sudden illness, with no clear medical explanation, left me bedridden. At the time, I cried with frustration. How could my body betray me at that very moment? Today I understand that it wasn't betrayal. It was the part of me that was afraid of being seen, afraid of failing, afraid of succeeding and not knowing how to handle it. This unacknowledged shadow pulled me back. And it was only when I faced that truth that I was able to move forward without paralyzing myself again. Perhaps you have lived through something similar, preparing for a test, a competition, an interview, and, suddenly, feeling an inexplicable block. This is what Jung described. The unconscious creates obstacles because what has been repressed needs space. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of discipline. It's fear in disguise. The fear of being exposed, the fear of failing, the fear of not deserving. Look at the case of Mike Tyson. One of the greatest boxers in history, with unquestionable talent. At his peak, he seemed unbeatable. But behind the strength were wounds that were never healed. And, instead of integrating his shadow, he let himself be consumed by it. The result was self-sabotage on a global scale. He lost a fortune of tens of millions of dollars, he lost credibility, he lost part of what was most valuable to him. It wasn't a lack of skill, it was the inability to deal with what was hidden behind the champion persona. And science confirms this process. Studies show that procrastination is not linked to laziness, but to fear. Psychologist Timothy Pychyl calls this mismanaged emotion. We avoid the task not because we don't want to do it, but because it triggers feelings of inadequacy, insecurity, or even perfectionism. This perfectionism, in turn, is an old wound, believing that nothing we do will be good enough. Thus, the cycle of self-sabotage perpetuates. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times you have ruined something important for no apparent reason? Why does this repeat? What inside you is so afraid of seeing this change happen? Isn't it more productive to stop blaming yourself and start investigating? I myself had to learn this the hard way. When I understood that my body and my failures were messages from the unconscious, I began to dialogue with them. I would ask, what are you trying to protect me from? What do you fear losing if I move forward? And I realized that, in many cases, self-sabotage was a request for recognition from parts of me that I was ignoring. The more I denied them, the stronger they manifested. The challenge, then, is not to fight against these patterns, but to bring them to consciousness. Write in a notebook, when was the last time you sabotaged yourself? What fear was behind it? And ask yourself, is there any part of me that still doesn't accept this new phase? This simple practice can illuminate hidden areas and give you the chance to negotiate with your own shadow. The curious thing is that, when we do this, the energy previously used to hinder us transforms into strength. That repressed aggression can turn into determination. The denied vanity can turn into healthy pride. The desire for recognition can turn into fuel to create an impact. The shadow, when accepted, ceases to be an enemy. But I want to be honest, the process is not painless. Facing your own sabotage hurts. I cried when I realized that, out of fear, I had thrown away opportunities that could have changed my life sooner. But it was in that crying that I found clarity. Because there is no greater victory than finally understanding why you yourself place obstacles in your path. And here I leave you with a challenge. The next time you realize you are procrastinating something important, don't blame yourself. Ask yourself, what exactly do I fear will happen if I complete this task? Write down the answer. Maybe you will discover that it's not laziness. It's fear. And fear can be faced, but only when it comes out of the darkness and is brought into consciousness. Dreams. Coincidences that seem impossible to be just chance. Small signs that, when we stop to pay attention, give us the feeling that there is something bigger talking to us. Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, and saw in synchronicities the proof that the internal and external lives are not separate worlds. I learned, from my own experience, that ignoring these two channels is like having a wise master whispering advice and still covering your ears. For a long time, I treated my dreams as strange, meaningless stories. But there was one that changed that forever. I dreamed I was lost in a dark forest. I walked in circles, distressed, and could not find a way out. Days later, I received an unexpected proposal that seemed absurd, to change my entire field of work. At first, I rejected it. But when I remembered the dream, I realized, I was already lost, trapped in a routine that was suffocating me. That invitation was the open trail in the middle of the forest. I accepted it, and it became a turning point in my life. The dream had prepared me to recognize the way out. Perhaps you have had a nightmare that seemed exaggerated. A chase, an accident, a monster. For Jung, these images carry messages. They are metaphors for what we try to ignore while awake. How many times have you dreamed you were falling? That can reflect the insecurity of losing control. How many times have you dreamed you were flying? Maybe your unconscious was asking for freedom. How many times have you dreamed you were naked in public? It could be the fear of being exposed in your vulnerability. They are not trivial coincidences, they are coded messages. And it's not just about dreams. Jung observed that when we begin to align with our inner truth, the life out there responds. That is synchronicity. You think about changing careers and, on the same day, someone sends you an article about professional reinvention. You feel you need to reevaluate a relationship and, unexpectedly, you meet someone who talks about exactly that. They are coincidences that resonate almost physically, as if they touch a string inside of you. Has it ever happened that you thought of someone and that person called right after? Or that you found a book exactly when you needed it? Coincidence? Maybe. But Jung would say it's the unconscious organizing signals in the visible world. I experienced this during a time of great doubt. I was about to give up on a project that seemed impossible to me. The same day, while walking distracted, I found a torn page from a book on the ground with a single legible sentence: "Keep going, even when nothing makes sense." It may seem silly, but that sentence was enough to keep me going for one more week. And in that week, the opportunity one was waiting for arrived. It wasn't magic, it was synchronicity. Science today confirms part of this phenomenon. Research shows that logging dreams increases our emotional perception and improves decision-making. Studies on selective attention reveal that when we are focused on a topic, we perceive more coincidences related to it. But there is something more. Many people report that when they commit to an internal change, the frequency of these coincidences increases. This is not superstition, it's alignment. What can we do with all this? First, create the habit of logging dreams. Keep a notebook next to your bed. When you wake up, write down what you remember, even if they are fragments. Gradually, patterns will emerge. You may discover that certain symbols always appear when you are about to face something important. Second, write down coincidences that catch your attention. Reread them after a month. You will realize that they form a kind of conversation with your own life. And here I want to propose an exercise. For the next 7 days, before you go to sleep, ask yourself a clear question. Something that is weighing on you: should I stay in this job, or what step do I need to take now? Write down the question and, when you wake up, log any dream that comes to you. Afterward, observe what also appears during the day: songs, phrases, encounters. See if there is a connection. You might be surprised by the clarity of the answers. Of course, some people are suspicious. Isn't it all just imagination? But I ask, what if it is precisely that imagination that contains the answers that your conscious mind cannot elaborate? And what if, by dismissing these signs, you are throwing away the most intimate compass you have? I learned that dreams and synchronicities don't solve life for us. They don't replace effort or remove our responsibility. But they act as flashlights on a dark path. They don't show the entire journey, but they illuminate the next step. And sometimes, that's all we need to continue. When I embraced this dimension in my life, something changed. I began to feel that I was not walking alone, that a deeper intelligence was accompanying me. Not as magic, but as a constant dialogue between the inside and the outside. And it is in this dialogue that we discover a new way of living, less anxious, more connected, more whole. If there is one single point I would like you to take away from this, it is this: true transformation does not need applause, it does not need an audience, it does not need an announcement. It happens in silence, in the intimacy, where no one else can see. It is in this discreet space that you reconnect with your shadow, face your sabotages, and learn to listen to the secret language of dreams and coincidences. It is there that the strength is born that can change your life from the inside out. And since you have made it this far with me, I want to invite you to continue this journey. The next video that is now appearing on the screen is the next step on this ladder. If today you understood how to begin the transformation in silence, there you will go even deeper, climbing a level in your evolution of wisdom, becoming at least 1% better than you are now. Thank you for joining me this far. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.